Good morning, fellow humanists. My name is Todd Kimball. I'll be your MC this morning. Happy Father's Day. Hope you're enjoying the weekend. Got the U.S. Open, baseball, good weekend for barbecuing. So hopefully it's a good Father's Day weekend for you. This morning's topic, the evolution of deceit. A reminder that humanism is a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. It advocates the extension of participatory democracy and the expansion of an open society standing for human rights and social justice. Our reader this morning is someone who has given so much to the organization. He's managed our website for many years. It's always a pleasure to hear what he has to say. Please welcome Mr. Val Humble.
Okay. I've chosen to read a selection from Lamentations of the Father by Ian Fraser. Of the beasts of the field and of the fishes of the sea, and of all foods that are acceptable in my sight, you may eat, but not in the living room. Of the hooked animals, broiled or ground into burgers, you may eat, but not in the living room. Of the cloven hoofed animals, plain or with cheese, you may eat, but not in the living room. Of the cereal grains, of the corn and of the wheat and of the oats, and of the cereals that are of bright color and unknown provenance, you may eat, but not in the living room. Of the quiescently frozen dessert and all frozen after meal treats, you may eat, but absolutely not in the living room. Of the juices and other beverages, yes, even of those in sippy cups, you may drink, but not in the living room. Neither may you carry such therein. Indeed, when you reach the place where the living room begins, of any food or beverage, there you may not eat, neither may you drink. But if you are sick and are lying down and watching something, then you may eat in the living room. Laws when at table. And if you are seated in your high chair or in a chair such as a greater person might use, keep your legs and feet below you as they were. Neither raise up your knees nor place your feet upon the table, for that is an abomination to me. Yes, even when you have an interesting bandage to show, your feet upon the table are an abomination and worthy of rebuke. Drink your milk as it is given you, neither use it on it any utensil, nor fork, nor knife, nor spoon, for that is not what they are for. If you will dip your blocks in the milk and lick it off, you will be sent away. When you have drunk, let the empty cup then remain upon the table, and do not bite it upon the edge by your teeth and hold it to your face in order to make noises in it sounding like a duck, for you will be sent away. When you chew your food, keep your mouth closed until you have swallowed, and do not open it to show your brother or sister what is within. I say to you, do not so, even if your brother or sister has done the same to you. Eat your food only, do not eat that which is not food. Neither seize the table between your jaws, nor use the raiment of the table to wipe your lips. I say again to you, do not touch it, but leave it as it is. For I come to you at the 1st of the month and at the 15th of the month with the bills and great whining and moan. And when the month of taxes comes, I will decry the wrong and unfairness of it, and mourn with wine and ashtrays, and rend my receipts. And you shall remember that I am, before, after, and until you are 21. Hear me then, and avoid me in my wrath, O children of me.
Thank you, Val, for a fun and timely reading. I have been told by an ex-wife and several girlfriends not to eat in the living room, so I heard that message loud and clear. But I do always keep my legs beneath me. I never put my feet on the table. So, hey, I followed some rules. This morning's presenter has entertained us many times over the years. He blends a deep scientific analysis with an appreciation for the beauty and complexity of our natural world. This morning's topic, the evolution of deceit. Organisms may benefit by appearing to be other than what they are. And evolutionary biologist Gordon Orians guides us on an analysis of the rich patterns of deceit and why deceit detectors have evolved. Dr. Orians is a Professor Emeritus of Biology at the University of Washington. He served as its director of environmental studies. He was elected to the National Academy of Sciences in 1989 and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1990. Let's have a rousing ovation from our live audience at the Friendly House and a warm yet muted welcome from our Zoom audience for Dr. Gordon Orians.
It's a pleasure to be with you again. I always, sorry I can't be with you in person. I really enjoyed my visit last fall. The evolution of deceit, as you know, basically all my talks are sort of variations on the theme of the world into which Darwin led us. So my talks are not for Darwin deniers, but for Darwin non-users who really don't embrace what it is to really live in the world that Darwin led us. And so what I'm doing today is to talk about the evolution of deceit, which is when an organism is pretending to be something that it isn't, either of a different species or more vigorous or whatever. And so that's the topic of this. And deceit is, I'm not going to give you a lot of examples of stuff of deceit because you all know all of those. My goal is to say, what are the rules that govern what can and cannot happen with respect to deceit? Why we see certain things, why we don't see other things, and how to think about the whole topic of deceit. And so apparently, hopefully you have on the screen a picture of an orchid. There it is. This is an orchid, the genus Ophrys. It's found in the Mediterranean areas. And it is a really unusual looking orchid, and it has a really unusual life cycle. It actually looks a lot like a female wasp or bee. And what you can't see here, but it also has the correct odor of one. And how does this orchid get pollinated? It's pollinated by a wasp that emerges from underground. It had just pupated and emerging as an adult. It flies and it thinks it's flying to copulate with a female of a species. It lands on this orchid and tries to copulate with it, but it picks up a polinium. And orchids gather all their pollen in a little packet called a polinium that sticks to the bee's back, and the bee flies off. Now, in order for this to work, of course, the wasp has to fly to another orchid, because if it learns that, hey, I've been duped by looking at this orchid, by going there, and flies away somewhere else, nothing will happen. So this depends upon the wasp flying to another orchid and trying to copulate with it as well. So this depends upon the wasp not learning from that initial experience. Now, so how does this possibly work? This seems kind of really crazy. But just think of this wasp, the wasps, as you know, have this complex life cycle where they're larvae and then they emerge and switch into adults. And when this wasp flies to this orchid, this is the first thing it's ever done since it emerged from the ground. And it has had no experience with the world whatsoever. And we really don't know whether it understands anything about whether it got duped or not with this, because obviously these orchids get pollinated, which means that the wasps are flying to another orchid of the species and depositing the polinium there. So why does this work? Well, it works. And why are the wasps so naive? And it basically boils down to the fact that there are thousands and thousands of wasps and very few orchids. And this is the theme that will emerge or continue in my talk, that what this means is that there is very, very little selection in the wasp population to react to having been fooled, because the vast majority of the wasps never encounter anything other than another wasp. They don't go to an orchid, so that there really is almost no selection on the part of the wasp population to react to this. And really, all the wasp is lost is a little bit of time copulating with an orchid and picking up a polonium and goes off. The selection against it is pretty weak, because this then has resulted in the evolution of this relationship, which is really rather strange. So there are several things I want to mention about this. One is that I chose an orchid because, in part, I don't think you'll be fooled into thinking the orchid understands what's going on. And I don't think the wasp understands what's going on. So deceit doesn't require, it doesn't preclude, but it does not require that the deceiver or being deceived has any awareness of what's going on. And the vast majority of cases, it probably doesn't. And with the orchid, this is clearly the case, which is why I wanted to open with it rather than with some other situation. So what we also have to, this shows that you have to think about if there is a deceit and somebody is being deceived, what is the cost to them of being deceived? Is there likely to be an evolutionary response to being deceived, so that the entity being deceived evolves and evolves to do some counter selection? So what I've indicated here with the wasp and the orchid example is the selection is so weak on the side of wasp that the vast majority of wasps will never encounter an orchid. So it just there's no selection that will ever happen that so to speak, gets the wasps to make a discrimination that they don't land there. So that the thing that I want to emphasize here is that when you look at what's going on with deceit, you have to ask who is being deceived, and is that an entity that's likely to have an evolutionary response to this? And in the case of the wasp or the orchid, there is a unit that is being deceived, but the selection against it is so weak and inconsequential that it has allowed this to go on. So that's the example that I've actually seen this orchid in Mediterranean France. And it's really metallic. And what you can't see from this example, it also has an odor that mimics that of the female wasp. So that's why the orchid and what I want to tell you about it. And so you can come. I know this is prettier, but you can come back to me now, okay? So I hope that was interesting. So that has set us with several sort of lessons to think about this. So I'm going to start with the examples of where the deceit involves mimicking individuals of some other species. But the second part of the talk, I'll talk about intraspecific, well, where you're not trying to imitate some other species, but you're trying to indicate that you are better or more superior than you really are. And that will be intraspecific deceit. And that's of course what is involved in any human aspects of deceit. So let's continue a little bit with, I want to talk about butterflies, because when Darwin wrote The Origin of Species by Natural Selection, he wasn't talking about the origin of species, he was talking about the species change, but he didn't have any examples of natural selection. There's no example of natural selection in Darwin's book because he didn't have any. Nobody had the idea first, nobody was looking at it. And so what Darwin said, here's how we can explain a lot of things with this. And he used artificial selection and plant and animal breeders, huge chapter on this, to see when people were actually selected, when we did have a designer, what happened. So the origin of species, Darwin had no examples. And the first real examples that did emerge regarded butterflies, and they involved naturalists working in the Amazon. And one of the naturalists found that he had collected a whole bunch of butterflies and looked at them. They all looked a lot alike. And when he looked closely, well, there were a lot of different species. And some of them were even from different families, so that they all looked alike, but he realized he had a whole bunch of species. And what was the case here? This is a case where all of them are toxic and predators avoid them. And these are toxic species that have converged on one another, and they all look alike, and they all benefit from being confused with somebody else. And so you get these constellations of species of butterflies in the tropics. The reason they're only found in the tropics is that you need a lot of species to make this work. And we don't have a lot of species like that up here in the temperate zone. So the few cases of this are limited to the tropics, where you have really rich species. But the other kind of mimicry that was also discovered was an edible butterfly comes to mimic a toxic one. And the example, of course, that's familiar to all of us is the monarch butterfly here in North America. And the mimic that it has is known as the viceroy. So what happens is that the monarchs pick up the toxin from the plants, the milkweed, and all that white stuff that's really toxic. They're resistant to it. They store it in their bodies, and so that makes them toxic. So when you take a monarch butterfly cat, and birds have to learn, by the way, birds have to learn what's good or not, and so they try it out. And if you take a marvelous picture of captive blue jays presented with a monarch caterpillar, it gobbles it up, and within a few minutes it's vomiting. It's really, really bad. And so, but birds have to learn this. And so, and these kinds of mimicry, birds are the selective agent. So birds learn, and from one experience with a monarch butterfly, they won't take that again. So, but if now we have a viceroy that is mimicking it, if the first thing the bird encounters is a viceroy, it thinks, things that look like that are really rather tasty, and it's more likely then to positively respond to a monarch caterpillar. It hasn't learned this yet. So here's a clear case where there's a cost every time a bird encounters a viceroy and learns that this is okay. There's some loss to the monarch butterfly caterpillar, which has increased avian mortality because there is a mimic. Well, so that means that the monarch is likely to evolve away from mutations that make it look less like the viceroy are likely to be favored. So well, how is it then that the viceroy manages to win out and get close to and actually do a good job of mimicking? And the answer is, like it was with the bee and the orchid, it's rare. You've all seen monarchs and know about monarchs. You may or may not have heard about the viceroy. You certainly haven't seen one. The viceroy is very rare. And the reason it only works when you're rare, if it's rare, and every mistake that is made with respect to that mimicry is a bigger fraction of the viceroy population than it is in the monarch population, where this is a very small thing. So that the selection is much stronger on the viceroy because it's rare, and because every death is a more significant part of the population. So the viceroy can evolve faster toward the monarch than the monarch evolves away from it. And that's why it works. And it works only because the viceroy is rare. And this is a general theme in all of this. A lot of these mimicries work only because the mimic is much rarer than the model. And if it were the other way around, the model would evolve away and we wouldn't see this sort of mimicry. The other thing I just want to mention about this is we see these final products, and the viceroy really looks like a monarch. Well, at the beginning, it wasn't all that good. And the orchids really didn't look that much like bees. But all it depends upon is a slight difference. And evolution can work with very slight differences. If they're favored over, the 5% difference becomes a major thing over time if it's consistent. So that as we look at these wonderful mimicries, remember that's not how they started out. They've been perfected and modified over time and giving us this beautiful thing. So, so this is the case where birds have to learn, and they learn what's toxic or not, and they have to try it out. And this is, and birds are involved in an awful lot of the mimicry we see because they do have to learn their major predators. They're active during the day. They have the same sort of visual systems that we do. And so they're the primary agents in a lot of what we see. But also, this is mimicking something that's toxic. Another way is, of course, that's very important, is mimicking something that's really dangerous. And the most common aspect of the mimicry of something that's really dangerous is the mimicry we see of bees and wasps. Other things looking like bees and wasps and having that yellow and black coloration. And there are hundreds of different mimics. There's a yellow spider that mimics, and the spiders have 8 legs and insects have 6. This little spider walks along holding its 2 front legs up, so it looks like it's only got 6. But here we have a lot of things mimicking these that yellow and black. And again, it's a situation. There's this little spider walking around. It was a long time before we discovered this because there aren't very many of those compared to the number of bees and wasps. So there's no selection. The bees and wasps aren't going to change their color away from this yellow and black because there's some of this. And a lot of the other things that are mimicking actually the yellow and black coloration. Again, relative to the abundance of bees, the social bees, these are very rare, and there's no really, the bees and wasps aren't going to really evolve a different color. The selection against is so weak on them that they don't respond evolutionarily to mostly other insects, but spiders that mimicking them. And these, of course, the mimics of these are rather small because a big thing isn't going to work. But these are very, very common. And we know a lot about them because we have done a lot of studies of bees and wasps. Another toxic, we have coral snakes that are very, very poisonous. And they're, what's the best mimic for a poisonous snake? Well, another snake. And so we have king snakes that are red and black and look like coral snakes that have slightly different pattern. Somebody who knows the pattern can tell it. But we have these king snakes that are living in environments where there are coral snakes, and they gain obviously some protection from possibly being confused for a toxic coral snake. Unfortunately, in the neotropics, there's a falcon called the laughing falcon that's a specialist on toxic snakes. It loves to eat coral snakes. And so actually the mimicry is much more effective where it is up in the United States, where there isn't the laughing falcon. And the predators on these snakes are likely to be more generalist, things like red-tailed hawks that get some or not. So anyway, we have lots and lots of mimicry of the color pattern of bees and wasps. Now, there's also a lot of mimicry of plant parts. There are a lot of insects that look like broken twigs or something like this, and that mimic the shape of a leaf, or that look like a little branch sticking out. There's a lot of this of mimicry of parts of plants by insects. And the reason, again, that works, the selection against the plants is so weak. What the plants are really being hit by are the herbivores that are going to come and gobble up and eat the stick insects as well as the leaves. And so these are relatively rare. There's almost no pressure that involves evolution of this change of form. Is the grass going to evolve a different form because there's an insect that mimics the shape of the leaf? The answer is almost certainly not, because the selection is so weak compared to the value of having that particular form for photosynthesis and whatever else the plant is getting. So that we have a lot of these, and some of the most spectacular mimicries are insects that mimic little parts of plants, and that there's almost no counter selection. That's has almost certainly no influence whatsoever on the evolution of plant form. Now, there's another thing I want to mention, that there is a lot of mimicry and we don't know about it because we're not very good at that, and that's odor mimicry. And we saw that in Ophrys, that orchid that actually has an odor that is very much like the odor of a female wasp. And we've learned about that because we learned about this thing and we let's check it out. There's one other example that I just find absolutely fascinating. There are certain butterflies that are parasites on bees. And these butterflies will lay an egg outside on the vegetation. It'll grow a little bit, and the larva drops to the ground, where it's picked up by a bee worker and taken into the hive. So what does it have to do? How does it have to mimic? And there we know that just one discrimination. Either you have the proper hive odor or you don't. So there's only one discrimination. So this little butterfly larva has to smell like it's a member of the colony to be taken in. So there's only one discrimination, and that's the only discrimination that the bees make. Either you're in group or the out group. And if you're in the in group, you're taken in. If they're the out group, you get attacked and killed. So these butterflies, so they get in, and depending on the species, they either then are just fed by the ants and grow up, or some of them are actually carnivorous and do some eating of their host. They pupate in there, and then they when the attached the adult bee crawls out of the hive up into the branches and starts this thing over again. So here's an example. The mimicry is entirely chemical, and there's probably a lot of that. And we just don't know about that because we don't have that sort of sensory thing. You walk in the woods with your dog, and the dog is in a different world than you are. And that's true of this. So there's probably a lot of olfactory mimicry that we just don't understand. So we're getting better at doing that, and we'll learn a lot more about that. So the bottom line here then is to summarize some of this. We're learning, we've all these spectacular cases that we're learning of that mimic this and mimic that. The reason we're just learning about them is that they're rare. They're hard to find. We miss them. So mimicry is not a ticket to abundance. It's a ticket to being able to survive even though there are not very many of you. So it doesn't lead to abundance, because if you get more abundant than your host, the host evolve away from you faster than you can evolve toward it. So it's always important. There isn't always an evolutionary response, as in the case of insects mimicking part of plants. There's no evolutionary response on the part of plants, and so that just goes on and it's independent. But some of these other things that I've talked about, there is an evolutionary response of the loser. And so when you look at any case of mimicry, one of the things you have to ask, what is the effect on the loser, the one that's being deceived? And is there likely to be an evolutionary response from the individual being deceived, so that it would affect whether the mimicry can occur or not? And the bottom line is that that is expressed in several examples I've given you, yes, there may be an response and it works, but the mimicry turns out to happen and nonetheless work because the mimic is rare. So, so a lot of these wonderful things we're discovering, the reason we're like, because they're rare and they're spectacular. But they're not. Just remember, mimicry isn't the ticket to getting common. It's a ticket to you being around and doing crazy things, and even though you're still very, very rare. So this is sort of an example of how to think about the thing when you're mimicking some other species, either something toxic or dangerous or whatever. And that's the most common form of these interspecific mimicry systems. And many of them involve an entity that's losing in their response, but some of them don't. So let me turn then to the second class of mimicry, which is where you're not mimicking some individual of another species, but your mimicry is related to that I am better in some evolutionary way than I really am. And this is very common then, particularly among vertebrates and social vertebrates, and it involves dominance and competition for status and competition for sexual partners. And that's what is involved in a lot of this kind of mimicry in human beings. We have the rare example of a human being that may mimic another human being, because many leaders have a stand-in that looks like them, and hopefully people won't notice that it's not the real guy out there, but that's a rather unusual and rare human sort of thing. So let's look at the more general thing where we have first competition for dominance. And there's a side thing that we're talking about sexual selection. And Darwin also wrote a book called The Evolution of Emotions in Plants, Man, and Animals. And this was not well received, whereas by then, this was about 20 years after he did The Origin, whereas the scientific community pretty well accepted that Darwin had got it right. When he came with the sexual selection theory, it had a terrible reception. Nobody would believe it, and it was awful. And I have my own personal interpretation why this was true. So who were the discriminating agents? Who were really deriving this? It was females. And can you imagine Victorian England, that all of this evolution is being driven by females exercising really interesting discriminations? And I think the reason that had so much trouble not that it's intrinsically more difficult to understand, that for Victorian England men to believe that a big part of evolution had been driven by clever females. Sorry, Darwin, that's just not going to sell. And it's now accepted that sexual selection is a big deal and very important, and we've gotten over that. But I think when this first hit Victorian England, I think my personal opinion is why it had such rough times, because the females are driving this, those dumb females that we don't give the vote to. I'm sorry. So anyway, that's a little aside, but this has had an interesting history too. So let's look at a thing where you're competing with, and this is typically the case of males, where males are competing for dominance, which then inevitably in history has led to access to sexual partners. So so the males are fighting, and so the winner is able to have access to females. And here's an interesting thing, because we have a blinkered view of this. The first rule of getting into fights is don't pick a fight that you're likely to lose. because fights are expensive. You may get injured. That your first fight may be your last, and you have a chance. So that organisms do a lot of work to try to assess one another without leading to fights. So the vast majority of contests don't lead to fights, but I'll describe a couple of them. But they are really boring, and they make really bad television, because when you want to have the big bashes and the males going at it and booing all this, and those do happen, but the vast majority of contests are resolved without any battle, and the reason is that it's very dangerous to get into a fight, and don't get into one you're likely to lose. So how do you assess whether you're likely to lose? Well, what these evolved into displays and other things that are highly reliable. They can't be cheated on. If it's something you can fake it doesn't work. But take with the elk or the red deer. The males get together and stand side by side, and they roar, and they roar, and they keep on roaring. And mostly at the end, somebody backs off. Well, why does that work? Roaring is really energetically expensive to go on keep doing that. And you got the big chest, and the volume and the pitch determines how big your chest is. And you can't cheat on the roaring. If you are able to do that and keep going on it, you're really good. And so most of these contests are resolved by roaring and somebody backs off. And as I say, we got a blinkered idea what happens, because that makes lousy television, and we all want to see the bashes. And so the vast majority of these things, so they depend upon reliable signals. And when the females are assessing the outcomes of these things, the females also use what are reliable signals. You can't cheat on them. If you go to the sage grouse leks, and the males are displaying away there, and you watch the females and they're walking on through, and they look like they're not paying any attention at all to what's going on. Now they really are. They're watching, and they come back and they look, and they end up, you can assess how well is this guy doing? Is he come back multiple times? Is the guy holding up in there? And they come back multiple times, and it ends up in a sage grouse lek. In any one season, one male gets the vast majority of the copulations. And they evaluate him over time, because you can't cheat on the fact that he's in the central spot, he's doing it, he's winning out. But you have to go back several times to figure that out. And they do, and it looks as though they're not paying any attention, but they really are. And with the human example, the guy invites you to a date, and he comes up with a tuxedo and a fancy car. Well, are these borrowed for the night, or there really is? Well, try them out several times. That's how it works to detect that. So these signals end up looking at reliable things that the responses of the evaluators are looking at signals that can't be cheated on. And with these big roaring contests, you can't cheat on that. You can't pretend to have a bigger belly and a bigger lungs and stronger than you are. The guy can outlast you, and you lose. And it's a good idea when you're being bested at that to quit, rather than, okay, now let's have a fight, because the individual that backs off was very likely to lose that fight. And this is also true of, these are male competing for status, which throughout evolution has meant access to sexual partners. And that has been true throughout human history until very, very recently, when higher status males had bigger reproductive success than lower status. And one of the things that's happened in modern society is to reverse that for the first time. And that may have some interesting consequences, but we'll leave that for another time. So let's look at where the males are actually courting females. And this is almost always male, but that's the way it works. But there are some species in which this is reversed, and the females do all the courting, etc. And that happens to be very, very rare among birds compared to the other way. We can talk about that a little bit more if you want. But so here we have males competing for access to females. And so where these become the most extreme and the most elaborate are in those species where the males provide no parental care. Where when the female is choosing from these disputes, the only thing that she is getting is genes. And so these big displays happen in species where the displaying males contribute nothing to parental care. And this is true of the grouse, and it's true of hummingbirds. The females build the nest, lay the eggs, incubate, and feed the babies unassisted by the males who are out there displaying. And so how does that work? Well, what that means is that the female is the payoff is only the genetic quality of the male. These situations can involve forcing basically the males into ever more elaborate displays. And if you've watched pictures of the New Guinea birds of paradise, you realize how unbelievably elaborate these displays are. And the females look, and the males go through all these things, and then sometimes the female just flies off and nothing happens. She may come back again. So what's happening there is the extremely elaborate displays, the ability to repeat this without error does indicate something about genetic quality. And this can be driven so far in places like New Guinea because those birds are all fruit eating. And so the males can run off into a fruiting tree and gobble up a lot of fruits and come back and keep doing it. And the female also, when she's raising young, can go off to a fruiting tree and get a lot of energy. And she has less time. She has to get insects and other stuff, feed the babies, because nectar is pretty good at powering muscles. It's no good for making muscles. So the females will have to get other energy. But you can drive these things to these incredibly elaborate place in New Guinea, where and the reason it goes further there than anywhere else is that there are no mammals and fruit-eating mammals in the canopy of New Guinea. There are almost no mammals. There's a few tree kangaroos up there, and if you've ever seen a picture of a tree kangaroo or looked at one, you kind of look at, I don't know what the hell I'm doing up here. They're very, very awkward. And one of the big worries in New Guinea is that if primates ever got there, monkeys, they'd wipe this out and change the whole system because the birds have it all up there, and there's no competition among mammals for the canopy resources. So it's been able to drive this in birds of paradise in New Guinea to greater extremes than occurs everywhere else. But in the neotropics, where we get the most spectacular displays, like hawks of the rocks and some of the mannequins you may have seen. These are, again, all fruit-eating birds, and where the males can go off and take up on fruits and come back very, very quickly. The females can get a lot of energy quickly from fruit and can have a lot of time then available to just get the other animal resources, particularly insects and arthropods, that are going to be necessary for raising the babies. So this is an example. How far can sexual selection drive these things? It's what is the form of counter selection? And most monogamous birds, where there's going to be some other stuff going on, you can't drive it very far because the counter selection is strong. It's very weak in these areas where it's all fruit-eating birds, and that's all the spectacular stuff are fruit-eating ones where the males have no role in whatsoever in parental care. The vast majority of birds are by parental care, and because other than laying eggs, males can do everything that females can do, and that's why it's so contrasting with mammals, where the energy for reproduction is female focused. Male mammals don't make milk, and so we have where biparental care is very rare in mammals, and it drives it very differently. So, looking at the bottom line of this bit of the story is that when we're having these kind of contests for access to resources or sexual partners, it drives things toward reliable signals, ones that can't be cheated on, that you can't pretend you've got a bigger lung capacity than you have. You can't pretend to be able to do those perfect dances every time. You can't cheat on those. So that we look at the way these things have evolved, they go toward really reliable signals, things that you can't be cheated on. Otherwise, if there are things that are easy to cheat on, nobody pays any attention to them. So this is the story of that part of it. Now, over most of human history, that's the sort of thing that did dominate human male competition, human courtship. And what's really happened now, of course, is that we're in a totally different age where the ability for fake information to spread enormously fast with internet, and it's totally changed the dynamics of things. And I'm not competent to talk about that. And if I tried to, you would know that I was deceiving you. So we won't go there. But let's go back to the stuff that I have talked about and where I have tried to convince you that I had something useful to say. And with the Q&A, now we'll see have I actually deceived you too.
Thank you, Gordon. We have been properly deceived and entertained and educated this morning. Excellent job. One online. Let's go to question number 1 at the Friendly House.
Okay, my question, the last time you were here in person, I hit you up with this particular theme that I'm into. Orchids and orchids are the deceiver. I'll make it short. The orchids and the deceivers don't know better. They don't know better. They do their job without knowing better. Humans, on the other hand, do their deceit and they know better, and it's called denial. And I brought this up the last time you were here, that humans, maybe monkeys or whatever, but probably not, because they don't deny things. Where humans have the ability to deny, even though they might be deceiving, they know better.
Well, yes, we do have the capacity, but I think an awful lot of human deceit is that we don't know why we did it. It came automatically, and then we fabricate an answer afterward. And the psychologists know a lot about this. And so I think with human beings, there is a mixture of we did it, and oh, I don't know why I did it. And then I fabricate some answer. And this is well known, actually. There's a whole psychological literature about this. But definitely it is true that we do have the capacity, and we often know that, yes, I'm definitely trying to deceive you. And that makes it interesting, because that makes it a little bit harder for the one being deceived, that they got to, what happens is you would develop a really good crap detector, and the ones on the end of being deceived get very good at teasing it out. And until the recent thing with the internet and all of this stuff, I think, and often it's, well, so often it's females being deceived. And females get very, very good at detecting how to figure it out. So that this has led to a real competition but the same sort of thing happens with other animals, even though they don't know, they're not aware of it. The selection sort of does the same kind of thing. And that's the wonderful thing about natural selection. You can produce all of this and nobody has to really understand what they're doing. And as I said, that's why I chose the orchid case at the beginning. Neither the orchid nor the wasp obviously have any comprehension of what they're doing.
Okay, I'm sorry, but my point was that we deceive ourselves, not trying to deceive others with denial.
Yeah. And we do a lot of denial. No, I wasn't trying to deceive her. That's really me, you know. It gets very, very complicated. And I'm honestly, I know something about this. I think you need another speaker.
Let's go to question number 1 from our Zoom audience and Hank Robb.
Hi, as usual, you have a wonderful presentation. I have a lot of questions, but I'll stick with this one. Particularly in mammals, as you were pointing out, males can't produce milk. So they can't participate in parenting the way other species might. Why doesn't this lead to more rape or whatever the equivalent would be if we're talking about a non-human species?
Well, actually, there is a lot. In mammals, so in birds, it's overwhelmingly biparental care. In the spectacular cases I just talked about, where it isn't, where it's uniparental. In mammals, 99% uniparental care. So that there's an awful lot of in primates where this is particularly well developed, but it also occurs in lions, for example, when you have a pride and you have the major dominant lion, male lion with the pride, and another lion or a couple brothers will come in and challenge him and get rid of him. And one of the first things that the challengers do is to kill all the cubs because they were fathered by somebody else.
Right.
And killing the cubs brings the females into estrus very quickly, and the male copulates with them. And this is true widely true in primates. It was first discovered by a woman who was then killed because this was thought was, and she described it as being adaptive, and she understood. Sarah Blackford Hurdy is the woman's name, and she discovered and showed that this was actually adaptive. So we do have in cases like this where we may get after some dominance change in which the males engage in killing offspring, and the females do all sorts of things to protect, and the females can go into false estrus. This is an amazingly complicated things going on, but that is related to the fact, and again, it doesn't depend upon the male lions or the understanding what's going on at all, or the females that go into false estrus and try to protect. This again could be, although it doesn't have to be, it could be without any definite awareness. But this does lead to some really rather interesting behavior and involving killing of offspring. Did that help?
Not quite the same thing as rape.
Well, no. Well, that's okay. Again, rape can occur whether or not there's any parental care, and it occurs in insects, and it's pretty widespread because when you have a situation where the energy is going to be all on the part of females, the male has a real incentive to inoculate as many females as possible because he's not going to do anything with the kids anyway. And so that does encourage and make it adaptive for males to attempt to rape, and for females attempt to avoid being raped. But again, it's not confined to primates. It's pretty widespread in insects too.
We are on the Father's Day theme here today, but we're not making the fathers look very good. Plenty of feminists have a lot to say here in this Q&A. Let's go to question number 2 at the Friendly House before I get myself in more trouble.
Okay, I got to ask you, how long has this thing about the orchids been known? It strikes me that Jay Gould, who was the biggest liar on Wall Street amongst the robber barons, was a famous collector of orchids, and I wonder if he learned anything from the orchids. If he modeled his career as a liar on the orchids that he admired so much.
I don't know the details, but I would rather doubt it. I mean, orchids are incredibly, there are more than 20,000 species of orchids, one of the most speciose groups of plants. And it's done it despite this living in impoverished environments and all of this stuff. It's really rather remarkable. And I don't remember just when this Office case was figured out, but I would be surprised if he knew anything about that orchid. Because there's thousands of them that don't do that.
Let's go to a question from our Zoom community and Joyce Lackey.
Hi, Gordon. Thank you for a fascinating presentation.
Hi, Joyce.
This rareness of the phenomenon, if it weren't, for example, if the host felt that, give me an example or two of a way that the host could suffer from being mimicked so much. In other words, what would cause that host to need to evolve?
Well, let me go back to the monarch viceroy case. Suppose the viceroy were very common. And that would mean that the mistakes would be a bigger proportion of problem for the monarch than for the viceroy, because there's small, every case of mimicry that's mistaken is a bigger fraction of the total thing when you're rare than when you're common. So this is simply a matter of relative abundance. A mistake is a bigger deal if there are not many of you. It's a bigger fraction of the problem. And if there are a lot of you, it isn't. So that what happens if the mimic, like a viceroy, were more common than the monarch would evolve away from it faster than it could evolve toward it. And the reason the viceroy has been able to evolve toward it is that it hasn't created a strong enough pressure on the monarchs that most birds never see a viceroy. They see the monarchs. And so that it's, but it's simply a statistical consequence of how important is any mistake relative to the size of the pop. And if you have a small population, every mistake is a bigger deal than if you have bigger. And that's really what drives it. Now, does that get at your question?
Well, then, so the species could be decreased faster. I think that's what you're saying.
Well, no, what would happen, suppose the viceroy were really common.
Yeah.
We wouldn't see a mimicry because the monarch would have evolved something different. It would evolve faster away from the viceroy. In order for a mimic to evolve toward the model, there has to be weaker selection on mistakes on the mimic. And so so every mistake that's made on behalf of a viceroy is a bigger deal because there's fewer of them. So it's a statistical thing. So that's why always what we're talking about, these wonderful things, and why we haven't found out about most of them until recently, is that they're rare. And mimicry is a ticket to happy rareness.
Thank you.
Did I get it, Joyce?
I think so. I think the way I said it was correct also then.
Yeah.
Your species would have more danger of being drained, or not eliminated, but
Well,
decreased.
well, yeah, yeah, I mean, now we get into the complicated thing of what determines how abundant the species is and how long it goes, of which there are 1,001 different things that are involved in that besides just the mimicry. But yeah, we don't, at least I don't know why the viceroy is rare.
Mhm.
Was it his food supply? What's going on? Why the viceroy is rare? I don't know. And maybe somebody does. I don't happen to know that. But something keeps it down, that mimicry doesn't provide an avenue for being common. So there's some other limitation on the population, and that has to be true every time we got a good mimic like that, that there's intrinsic limitation that prevents them from getting along. If it were common, then we wouldn't see it anymore. We wouldn't see any mimicry because the monarch would have evolved something different. And
That's good.
remember, what we're seeing is the end product of a very, very long time of stuff happening.
Let's go to question number 3 at the friendly house.
I'm number 3. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I have a flower garden, and what I've noticed is there is a weed that is able to mimic different flowers. It's the same weed, but it mimics different leaf, not flowers, but leaf. Like if it's near a flower I'm taking care of that's tall, it will grow tall. And if it's near a plant that's has big leaves, the leaves will be bigger. To me, that seems like it knows. I find this weed fascinating, even as I pull it out, you get rid of it. But it appears to me like it knows how to behave. And it's just, I find that fascinating. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, first let me say, I don't think the plant knows. Plants are very depressing because it tells us that you can be extraordinarily successful with having no brain at all. And I find that kind of depressing, but what I think you're talking about is plants are growing together, and I think it's a story of competition for light, because almost all above ground stuff in plants and the forms and relations relate to competition for light, because although light is, and you cannot deplete light, because light is renewed at the fastest speed known on Earth, namely the speed of light. And so you cannot deplete light, but you can prevent somebody else from getting it by casting a shade on them, because light is directional and changes. And so I think what you're describing is some interesting patterns in how plants evolved to compete for light in mixed communities.
Because it keeps me from, sometimes it keeps me from pulling it out, because I think, well, that's the real plant, and I just, and then it does eventually become, but I think it's after it flowers or seeds. So I just find it an interesting, very interesting plant. Thank you.
There, that's my guess. That's my guess, because and almost everything we can look at in the structure of plants up above ground is competition for light that's driving it, and that's what drives plants to get tall. There's no benefit in getting tall. You lie along the ground and put no energy into stems and stuff like that. Here's the perfect example of this is the zucchini.
Yeah.
People, with respect to zucchinis, fall into 2 categories: those that don't have any, and those that have too many. And the zucchinis don't spend any effort in supportive structures to grow on the ground. And when your zucchini plant dies, there's nothing there. Everything went into squash.
The weeds are outshining the fathers today on Father's Day, their ability to fit into society. And look at Goldie taking center stage on Suzanne's Zoom screen there. Goldie wants to be a part of our nature today. let's go to question number 4 at the friendly house.
Yeah, one thing worth mentioning is birds like parrots that or other species that can mimic either human speech or other animals or even random noises. Can you give us a little description about the evolutionary advantage of that?
Well, vocal mimicry is puzzling. We don't understand it very well. Some of vocal mimicry is to attract attention away. But parrots are very unusual. Parrots are really smart, and they can. Obviously, there's been no evolutionary advantage to mimicking Polly-want-a cracker sort of thing that we can see in parrots, but parrots are, what do I say? They're adapted. They're herbivores, and they especially adapted to eating unripe fruit that is toxic and stuff. And so they're able to detoxify and have access to a lot of resources. And the baby parrots grow extremely slowly because parrots don't depend at all on animal tissue to raise their babies. So parrots engage in very complicated social interactions between the pair. They have to engage in a very, very long time. The babies grow really slowly. So parrots do a lot. The pairs are involved in a long-term contract, do a lot of talking to one another. And it seems to me that the vocal complexities have arisen as a result of the rather unusual reproductive biology of parrots. They're really absolutely fascinating. But I don't, that's probably not a very satisfactory answer.
Well, that's okay, but I think if copyright infringement laws were in effect in the insect world, I think the viceroy butterfly would be in big trouble.
Copyright.
Okay, I think that will be a good place to end our Q&A unless we have any last minute questions from the friendly house. Dave, let's see, I see a hand waving. Al is waving. I guess that's for the question, correct?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead, Al.
Gordon, you got to where you didn't want to talk about all the complex ins and outs of deception and counter deception and the social structures and all of that. And I wonder what this means for our attempt to, as humanists, to create an ethical system based on ethics and that are based on consequences, evaluation of consequences. If deception has good consequences, that means humanists might like deception, or does this just show that the world is really more complicated than humans are really built to figure it all out? And are we way above our race of trying to create ethics at all?
Fools rush in where wise men fear to tread, but there's no question that what we've entered in, where a situation that is so different, so complex, so unlike any ways that we have evolved to detect cheating and fake news and that sort of stuff. And I'm scared. I really am deeply scared as to what we're in, because you can't establish. We've got now the United States have two populations with alternative views of the world. We can't even agree on facts. We're in a post-factual where we can't establish causality. We don't have any agreement about causality, and how you deal with this, I'm deeply afraid. I really am that we have got ourselves, that our big brain. One of the things our big brain does is allow us to ask all sorts of questions of who are we and where we came from, but they also allow us to do unbelievable, nasty things that have no way of tracing causality. And I hate to leave you on such a somber note, but if you want to have your note, don't ask me any more questions about that.
Gordon, during this Q&A, I was trying to decide if Trump was the weed or the viceroy or what he was, but so I appreciate the ending there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and a spirited Q&A. Gordon, it's always good to see you. Excellent job today.
It was a pleasure. I always enjoy interacting with you. You're a wonderful group.
Thank you. Thank you so much.